Let me give you the top 10 reasons that the United States finds itself in this position. We go back to World War II, and I'll take you up into the 1980s and explain exactly why the U.S. found itself in this position. Now, I should note that the U.S. Merchant Marine during World War II did yeoman service. It was massive. 733 ships sunk, nearly 10,000 merchant mariners killed. It was one of the most dangerous professions to have in World War II, is to be a merchant mariner. At the end of World War II, the services wrote their histories. The Army, for example, wrote 79 volumes of what's called the Green Book. 79 volumes of books like this. This is a big honking book. That's a lot of information in there. It's great. The U.S. Merchant Marine, for its history in World War II, got this. 81 pages. 81 pages. 733 ships sunk. You could basically put about 9 ships sunk on each page. And that is the history you got there. So the Merchant Marine was not given much credit for its service in World War II. But that's not the issue here. We're going to look at the top 10 issues that have caused the decline of the Merchant Marine. Number 10, the Ship Sales Act of 1946. The U.S. was transporting 63% of the world's ships cargo at the end of World War II. We could have sat there at the end of World War II and said, screw you all, we're going to maintain dominance over the world's oceans because we have it now. We're going to maintain it because our Merchant Marine is massive. We just built 5,777 ships from 1937 to 1945. We are the dominant maritime force. But what we did as a bargain basement price, sold 1,113 ships under the Ship Sales Act of 1946 to help repopulate our allies' merchant marines, replace them, the British, the Dutch, the Norwegians, the Greeks. We sold those ships off so that our allies could rebuild their fleet. The next thing we did is create open registries. Now, open registries came in during World War II, the Panamanian Registry, for example. During World War II, to get around Neutrality Act so we can ship high-octane fuel to the British during the early part of World War II, particularly during the Battle of Britain, we initiated open registries. Right after the end of World War II, one of our Secretaries of State, Edward Stenedis, decided to assist the nation of Liberia, one of the few free independent states in Africa at that time, with a business that they could do, and the idea was the open registry. And we've seen that. It's sometimes called flags of convenience. It has proliferated around the world, so you get states like Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands, which are the biggest ones, but we've seen new ones come in, particularly with the Russians and the Dark Fleet. The third thing, the Marshall Plan, 1948. So, we're going to give you all these commercial ships so that you can rebuild your merchant marine, but you're going to need shipyards. Well, that's what the Marshall Plan does. Gives you money so that you can start rebuilding your shipyards. Matter of fact, some of the modular shipyards that were built in the United States that weren't needed anymore were taken apart and shipped overseas to Japan, to Europe, to help them build their fleet. So we not only gave them ships, but now we're giving them the means by which they can rebuild their fleet. 7, the creation of the Military Sea Transportation Service in 1949. The U.S. government, the Department of Defense, created its own personal merchant marine, the Military Sea Transportation Service. This is something that the U.S. has been doing since World War I, and I would argue that it adopted the wrong principle. I've studied this extensively. This is my doctoral dissertation is on this. And one of my perceptions that happens here is that the U.S. misconceives the creation of MSTS, what is today the Military Sealift Command, and they believe they can get away with just operating in wartime environments with this military commercial fleet, when in truth, they needed the U.S. Merchant Marine. And unfortunately, what this does is further bifurcate the issue between the commercial merchant marine and the military and naval shipping, so that there is a cleave right down the middle of them, and we just don't have good relationships. Number 6, the Interstate Highway Act of 1956. If you want to know what kills the Jones Act fleet, those ships that are in the coastal trade, it's the interstate highway system. The interstate's highway system creates what we know today is I-5, I-10, I-95, I-50, I-40. All those interstates are created through the interstate highway system. And nothing leads to the end of U.S. commercial shipping more in the coastal trade than the interstate's highway system, because you just don't need them anymore to haul cargo. Also, in this period of time, 1956, we see the introduction of containerization. Next, the introduction of the DC-8 and the Boeing 707. Now, you're sitting there going, Sal, why our airline is important in 1958? We just saw the towing of the SS United States down to Mobile, Ford's eventual sinking off the coast of Florida. The demise of the SS United States was caused by the DC-8 and the 707, because in 1958, more people crossed the Atlantic by air than by sea. That leads to the demise of the U.S. commercial shipping passenger trade across the North Atlantic. It also does something else. It allows Americans to fly across the United States, which means that railways can now be devoted almost exclusively to moving cargo. And now the railways open up for the movement of cargo, and that becomes really important. 1962, the Colonial Pipeline. If the interstate highway system was the demise of the freighters in the Jones Act fleet, the Colonial Pipeline was the demise of the tankers in the Jones Act fleet, because now you don't need tankers to haul from Houston up along the East Coast all the way up into New York, because the Colonial Pipeline takes over for that. You can move diesel and gasoline through that method. It definitely hurts the U.S. commercial fleet. Third, the Vietnam War of 1965. Vietnam, this is a topic I tend to know a lot about for a variety of reasons, because I literally wrote the book about shipping on the Vietnam War. My Fourth Armored Defense deals specifically with this. It's my master's thesis that I did. But Guns and Butter, the Lyndon Johnson program, really was split here, because, either you support the Vietnam War or you support social programs. A lot of the American money was going into new social programs, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Medicaid, Medicare, all very important for Americans. However, there was very little money left to really sustain the U.S. commercial fleet. The Vietnam War also led to the continuation use of vessels that in 1965 were 20 years old after the end of World War II. This should have been the moment when we were building a whole new fleet of vessels. There were new technologies coming in, and the U.S. missed the opportunity in 1965 to do it. Now, they do pass the Merchant Marine Act of 1970. The 1970 Act aimed to build 300 ships in 10 years, so 30 ships a year. That was the plan. There were incentives to build it with construction and operational differentials. There was expansion of the shipbuilding that can be done. You could use different types of vessels. However, one of the problems in the Merchant Marine Act of 1970 was it phased down the amount of money you can get year by year, so you tended to build more ships early and fewer ships later on. It also required ships to be locked into trade routes, which meant a lot of operators didn't want to participate in this, because you have to be flexible out there on the shipping. But the thing that killed U.S. shipping more than anything else was the demise of the Merchant Marine Act of 1936, Section 5, that dealt with construction and operational differential subsidies. In 1936, Article 5, or Title 5 of the Merchant Marine Act, provided construction differentials. So if you're going to build a ship, for example, you're going to give money to the operator of the vessel to offset the building of the ship. So low interest loans, money to offset the higher cost to build in the United States. The 1970 Act gave that money directly to the shipbuilders. And then operational differentials, this allowed you to get a differential to operate a U.S. flagship in the international market. Now, we get rid of this in the 1980s and 90s. We bring it back in the late 1990s, the operational differential, under something called the Maritime Security Program, now under the Tanker Security Program. But what this meant was, in terms of building ships, you see the drop. This is a chart showing you ship construction in the United States in the mid-1970s, and you can see where it falls off a cliff. It falls off a cliff in the 1980s. Why? Because those construction differentials go away, and that shipbuilding goes across to Europe, it goes across to Japan, it'll eventually go to Korea. And the only reason you see kind of spikes in there, especially in the 1990s, early 2000s, is we were building replacement tankers because of the Exxon Valdez going aground in Alaska, the requirement for double hull tankers. And literally the only ships you build today in U.S. shipyards that are commercial are those that are in the coastal trade, the Jones Act trade. And this is one of the reasons why we see a lot of criticism about the Jones Act. People will just sit there and say, well, the Jones Act doesn't guarantee shipping in the United States. It wasn't meant to, not Section 27. The whole act was meant to ensure there was shipping in the United States. But what we did is we removed it. The construction operational differentials was a modification of the 1920 Act, and we find ourselves in the situation we are in today. All right,